This video will be discussing Sunni, Shia, and Sufism, variations on the Islamic faith. And if you're familiar with anything having to do with Middle East conflict, Middle East tension, I mean, this is conflicts that have been going on for hundreds of years. A lot of this stems from the division between Sunni and Shia Muslims. This refers to two groups that have a different idea of who should have been the first caliph, who should have been the first leader of the Islamic faith after the passing of the Prophet Muhammad. Well, there were two groups, as I mentioned. One group believing that the next leader of the Islamic faith should be an individual that the majority chooses, right? It's a person or an individual that's chosen by consensus. Those people were Sunni. Those people are Sunni. The very first caliph was then Abu Bakr. It's the father. He's the father-in-law of the Prophet Muhammad. So father-in-law is not blood relative. However, there was a group that said, no, the next or first leader after the Prophet Muhammad's passing should be chosen by God. It should be a person that's blood related to the Prophet Muhammad. This individual was Ali, who was not only the Prophet Muhammad's son-in-law, but was also his cousin. So here we have a blood relative. So those that believe that Abu Bakr was really the first true caliph, chosen by consensus, those are Sunni, people of the tradition. Those that believe, no, Ali should have been the first caliph. This should be a decision by God through bloodlines. Those people are Shia. Now, let's take a quick look, general overview of the differences between these two, just generic differences. What we see is that Sunni are more orthodox in their following of the Quran. It's a more traditional understanding of the Quran as being without flaw, as being absolute in nature. And the majority of Islams in the world are Sunni. However, Shia are folks who believe that the Quran, as with the other traditions, Judaism and Christianity, over time has been tampered. And beneath what is obvious in the readings are deeper meanings, are deeper ideas that can be gleaned if we chose to go beyond surface level interpretations of the Holy Scripture. And there's also a sense that the teachers, that the leaders of prayer are inspired leaders, right? That they're divinely inspired leaders. So what I'd like to do is transition to a counterculture approach to the Islamic faith. Over time, people, our growing group within the Islamic faith, start to get the sense that Islam is becoming too superficial, that people within the faith are becoming too caught up in the externals, the exoteric teachings, right? And forgetting what the root of the teachings are, what the heart of the teachings are. Getting too caught up in practice, getting too caught up in ritual, getting too caught up in orthodoxy, that they forget what the purpose, right, the original intent of God's word to us through the Holy Quran was. These people gave up their possessions, they gave up materialism, and they're dressed in wool. This is why they're referred to as Sufi, Suf referring to wool. A way to think about Sufism in general is to think about a philosophy that says, love the pitcher less, like pitcher of water, love the pitcher less and the water more. So just like there was a criticism in the days of the Prophet Muhammad that said, there is God's word through Judaism, there's God's word through Christianity, but over time these have become tainted by man. Sufism has a similar sentiment, but with regards to Islam itself, that over time people get caught up so much so in the superficial aspects of the faith, the practices and the orthodoxy, that they They neglect what the purpose of those things are. What's the heart of it? So what we see the Sufis do is we see a group that focuses more on the spiritual aspect of the faith, right? The esoteric, the secretive, the inner workings, the inner processes of the faith. We see a group that de-emphasizes, the rituals and traditions, because people get too caught up in the traditions that they forget what the traditions are for. So they de-emphasize the traditions. And instead, the main focus then, through the main esoteric focus, is going to be on knowing God. So remember, the broader picture here within the Islamic faith is about remembering our divinity, remembering that there is one true God. So Sufis are those that want to refocus their faith to be purely about reconnecting with God. And more than that, actually, it's about experiencing God firsthand. So, how do they go about doing this? This is kind of what I want you to get a sense of through the readings for today. How do you think Sufis are trying to know God again? How do you think Sufis are trying to reconnect and have an intimate relation with God again? Well, I gave you various readings from the poet Rumi, the Sufi poet Rumi. And what we see through the poetry is this sense that we can have an emotional connection with God. We can remember God through passionate love. It's an emotional knowing of God. So let's take a look at a few of these. The minute I heard my first love story, I started looking for you, not knowing how blind that was. Lovers don't finally meet somewhere. They're in each other all along. Oh, beloved, take me, liberate my soul. Fill me with your love and release me from the two worlds. If I set my heart on anything but you, let fire burn me from inside. Oh, beloved, take away what I want, take away what I do, take away what I need, take away everything that takes me from you. On the surface, this might seem like the sort of love poetry that you may encounter on Valentine's Day, or love poetry that you might file in the back of your wallet in case you meet that person that has swept you off your feet. The idea here is that the Sufi poet Rumi is telling us that we can experience God through this sort of love. Or, another way of saying it, is that God can be experienced through passionate love, the same sort of love that we feel when we fall head over heels over somebody. Or, another way of saying it, is that your relationship to the divine is like the type of passionate love we feel when we fall in love with a partner. So we see then through this poetry the idea that we can know God through this sort of passion, this sort of emotional, involvement. Our prophet's way is love. We are the sons of love. Our mother is love. My God is love. I have come only to speak of love. God tells Moses, I want burning. Those who pay attention to ways of behaving and speaking are one sort. Lovers who burn are another. So this is in reference to the burning bush, right? God speaks to Moses. God gets Moses' attention through a burning bush. And we hear this narrative within within Judaism, right? And the parallel being the connection being made here is that burning bush, that feeling, that experience is what it feels like to experience God. It's this overwhelming sense of love. And it's so overwhelming that it burns from the inside. And maybe you can relate to this. Anytime you've fallen in love with somebody, anytime you fall head over heels with somebody, you might have felt this burning within you that you can't think of anything else. So we've been talking about how Islam calls us to draw our attention away from our everyday priorities to focus on the one great cause, right? The cause greater than ourselves, this unifying cause. Well, this unifying cause is this passionate love. And when we can feel that within us, that burning, then we can't help but focus ourselves and our attention to God. Take a look at this tale, the tale of the moth and the flame. One night the moths gathered together, tormented by their longing to unite themselves with the candle. They all said, "We must find someone to give us news of that for which we long so earnestly." One of the moths then went to a castle and saw the light of a candle within. Upon returning, he reported what he saw, but the wise moth said, "He has no real information to give about the candle." Then another moth visited the candle, passed close to the light, drawing near to it and touching the flame with its wings. He too came back and explained something of what union with the candle meant. But the wise moth said to him, "Your explanation is really worth no more than your comrades." A third moth rose up and threw himself violently into the candle's flame. As he entered completely into its embrace, his members became glowing red like the flame itself. The wise moth saw from afar that the candle had identified the moth with itself and had given the moth its light. He said, "This moth alone understands that to which he has attained. None other knows it, and this is all." What do you make of this tale? Take a second. Take a second, reflect on this. Moths naturally are attracted to light, right? They're naturally attracted to candlelight. In the story, we hear of moths that get closer and closer to the candle and report back their knowledge. Yet the wise moth always says, this knowledge is not knowledge. It's not complete. You don't really know. Think about that in terms of people's relationship to the divine. Right? You can get teachings through text. You can get teachings by hearing a teacher talk. You can get information by participating in classes and by participating at your faith's weekly gatherings. But how do you really know? How do you really know? You really know by immersing yourself in it. You can't know God by doing something external, by participating in practices or by simply having beliefs. What you need to do is you need to literally immerse yourself with God. So there's a line here that talks about how as he entered completely into its embrace, his members became glowing red like the flame itself. The wise moth saw that from afar that the candle had identified the moth with itself, right? It had become the moth. It had seen the moth in itself. Hence the moth starts to be inflamed and had given the moth its light. And it's only here, by immersing yourself, by becoming one with the light, that the moth really knows the candlelight. You can see a parallel then with how the Sufis see how we can know God. We can't know God from outside of God and by staring and by hearing teachings about God. You can only know God by getting in God, by jumping into God. And this is the same thing with a relationship, right? You can know something about an individual by reading their bio. You can know something about an individual by having trivial chit chat over coffee. But to really know an individual, you need to delve into them. You need to become them. You need to merge with them. And it's this sort of sentiment, it's this sort of belief that is promoted by Islam. And they achieve this by entering ecstatic states, right? You achieve intimate merging with divinity by altering one's state of mind in order to literally experience divinity, by literally merging with divinity. One of the more famous examples of this as whirling dervishes, the individuals who have this technique by which they whirl. People sometimes refer to as dancing, but they whirl, but the act of whirling alters their state of consciousness, alters the way they experience things. And the idea is that through this altered state of consciousness, they are merging with the divine. Entering into these altered states is akin to entering the flame for the moth. There's a video of this I'm having you watch for this lesson, so make sure to watch that. And whirling dervishes, they are based in what we consider Turkey now, and the story behind them is somebody asked Rumi, I think a king had asked Rumi, could you please develop a practice for us to help us in our develop ourselves spiritually, develop our experience of God? And Rumi came up with this particular practice for those particular people. Now, whirling dervishes are kind of pretty well known, and you'll see whirling dervishes come around to local places, local theaters, and you can actually experience them for yourselves. But the idea isn't that you gain an ecstatic state by watching a whirling dervish. The idea is that you enter an ecstatic state by doing this, by whirling yourselves. So, another way in which we can delve into an experience of God, have an intimate relation with God, is through intuitive discernment. Now, what does that mean? It means intuitively, rationally, with our minds, discern God, see through to God. And the metaphor is the belief that our eyes are kind of shielded, when in fact God is here now. God is around us now. It's just that there is a veil, and this veil prevents us from seeing God, the God that is here. One way to think about this is to look out your window. God is that's right in front of the window, but our focus is so much on the glass that we don't notice what is right in front of the window beyond it. So for Sufis, there is this sense that God is here. God is all around us right now. We are immersed in God right now. But our perception is clouded. Our perception is veiled. And we stare, and we're conditioned to focus so much on the veil that we aren't able to see through it, to see and experience the God that is ever present. So there is a hadith, there's a teaching. Hadiths are teachings that are thought to have come directly from the Prophet Muhammad. So there's the Quran, right? There's the sacred text that the Prophet Muhammad was given by God through the voice of Gabriel. But there are also teachings that Muhammad himself is said to have passed on to those that followed him. These teachings are referred to as hadiths. So there's a hadith that says the Quran possesses an external appearance and a hidden depth, an exoteric meaning and an esoteric meaning. This esoteric meaning, in turn, conceals an esoteric meaning, so it goes on for 7 esoteric meanings. The idea is that with the Quran, people will oftentimes, and just like with other religious texts, people oftentimes have cursory readings and believe that whatever idea or belief jumps off the page to them initially, that's it. Well, this hadith emphasizes the fact that there's multiple depths of meaning within the Quran, and that when you think you understand something, there's always more that can be gleaned from particular passages. For the Sufi, getting into the depths of meaning, developing the skill of piercing through and digging beyond superficial interpretation, this is what's necessary for us to have an intuitive discernment of the divine, to see through the veil. Now, there is this author named Idris Shah, who famously collected various stories, various Islam tales that were thought to be tools for developing the mind necessary to pierce the veil, tools that were meant to develop a mind that was able to pierce through literal understanding in order to get at the esoteric, deeper meanings of the Holy Quran. by which we're able to experience God all around us now. The stories caught the attention of a psychologist at Stanford University named Robert Ornstein. And Robert Ornstein wrote several books from a psychological perspective that looked at how these stories worked on the mind. A lot of these stories revolve around tales of the Mullah Nasrudin. To summarize, the Mullah Nasrudin is kind of a wise fool. It's the clown who actually is revealing truths about how things are. It's the fool that exposes us to a deeper understanding of things. And you were assigned a couple of readings concerning the Mullah Nasrudin. So let's go ahead and take a look at a couple of these. The Sultan of a great city was annoyed by the cheats and liars who entered his gates and caused trouble. He therefore set soldiers at all entrances. The soldiers were under orders to hang those who lied about their purpose for wishing to enter. The Mullah Nasrudin saddled his donkey and rode to the city. At the gate, a guard stopped him and asked his purpose in wishing to enter, and warned him that a lie would result in his being hanged. Okay, so in other words, if you lie, you'll be hanged. I'm going to ask you questions, so you want to answer honestly, because if you lie, you'll be hanged. This is good, for I've come to be hanged, said Nasrudin. You are a liar, and will certainly be hung, said the guard. But wait a minute. Then you know I have spoken the truth. And if that is true that I have spoken the truth, then I should not be hanged, said Nasrudin. So what strikes you about this tale? If you notice, there's a paradox here. Nasrudin says, I have come to be hanged. Well, the guard, if he believes that Nasrudin is true, should let him go. But the guard doesn't believe Nasrudin is telling the truth. He's not. Who comes to be hanged? So he must be lying. In which case, Nasrudin will be hung. But if Nasrudin is hung, then Nasrudin actually told the truth. So, what do you think the story is about? Now, remember the hadith. The idea is that there's always several meanings to something. And as described by Robert Ornstein, the idea here is that these stories are meant to alter the way we process information. That we often process information in a very rational way, right? That we process information in a very linear way, and that sometimes this linear rational thinking process gets in the way of us gleaming truths. This should sound familiar. In fact, a lot of what we've been discussing so far with Sufism should sound familiar. A lot of these concepts you might be able to connect with what we learned in Hinduism. A lot of these concepts, maybe you can relate to what we learned about Buddhism, in particular Zen Buddhism, and the notion of Zen koans. But as Robert Ornstein describes it, right, these are meant to question the way we normally think, to kind of put a wrench in our normal thinking processes. And by putting a wrench in our normal thinking processes, that space of mind allows insights to arise. Now here, with this paradox of truth, maybe we can come to a certain conclusion about truth. That truth is kind of relative. That the absolutes in life may not be absolute. And maybe that sort of concept, that sort of notion, will allow us to see through the veil. One way to think about this veil that is between us and the divine is think of this veil as our normal way of thinking, right? Our normal way of perceiving the world. Well, we need then to find a way to stop perceiving the world normally. We need to find a way to stop thinking about the world normally if we're going to see through it, to experience the divine all around us. Let's take a look at another one. Man was walking home late one night when he saw the Mullah Nasrudin searching under a streetlight on hands and knees for something on the ground. Mullah, what have you lost? He asked. The key to my house, Nasrudin said. I'll help you look, the man said. Soon both men were down on their knees looking for the key. After a number of minutes, the man asked, Where exactly did you drop it? Nasrudin waved his arm back toward the darkness. Over there in my house. First man jumped up. Then why are you looking for it here? Because there is more light here than in my house, said the Mullah Nasrudin. You may have noticed that a lot of these stories, or at least the two we've looked at, they sound like jokes, right? They sound like humorous tales that people pass along for fun. And in fact, if you go to Turkey, you'll often see these books made for children, cartoon books that are about the Mullah Nasrudin. They're about the tales of the Mullah Nasrudin, and they're meant to be children's stories. They're funny children's stories. But according to Sufis like Idris Shah, what we see here is actually a tool, a technique for stopping how the mind normally understands things, as trying to stop and halt the mind from how it normally perceives and thinks about problems. What do you make of this story? What might it be saying to you? And again, there might be, according to some people, various ways of making meaning out of these sorts of Nazareth stories. One thing to ask yourself is, again, from mythos perspective, is have you ever experienced this? Now, what I mean by this isn't have you ever lost a key and looked for it in the wrong place. What I mean by this is, have you ever lost something in the darkness? Have you ever looked for something in the wrong place? And you looked for it not because you actually thought it was there, but you looked for it because it was easier to do. It was the easier path. One example is dealing with, personal problems, dealing with internal strife. Oftentimes, the key to dealing with personal problems, internal strife, is to look within, to figure out, what's bothering you on the inside. What sorts of things from your past should you delve into to understand why you feel this way now? But a lot of the times what we do is we go outward. We do something external to soothe ourselves because that's easier to do, right? Take the drink of alcohol, place our attention in something superficial like buying material possessions, because those are easier paths to dealing with feelings of uneasiness, anxiety, insecurity. It's easier paths to do something external like that rather than look inside to find out what inside is causing you to feel this way. Again, one interpretation, not possibly many. But the notion here is that if you can develop the faculty of mind that allows you to delve deeply into multiple meanings of these sorts of stories, you're developing the faculty of mind that allows you then to intuitively discern God all around us, right? Intuitively experience the God that's here only if we're able to look past the normal way we perceive, the normal way we think about the world. This is a very esoteric concept, right? Similar to some of the things we talk about with Zen Buddhism, some of the things we talk about with Vedanta Hinduism. So take some time, digest this some more. Maybe look into Nasrudin stories and see what else you can glean from more of them. What other insights you can. But this sort of interpretive practice, many people think this is the intent of the Quran, the Holy Quran. The lyricism, the poetic phrasing, maybe it's meant to be read this way. And that to think one understands, that one has it, that's foolishness. And that's what keeps us away and detached from experience of the divine. Maybe it's being humble and continually being curious and acknowledging that there's more for you to understand. Maybe that's what's needed to experience the divine. So, what's the core of the religion? What's at the core of the faith? The ultimate for Islam is God, right? The God. Again, to emphasize it because it grew from a culture that was polytheistic. So the God, right? Allah. What's the human condition as described by Islam? The human condition is one where we've gone astray from God, where we've been distracted, so much so that we're off the path that God had originally intended, the path that God had intended for us in the garden, path that God had intended us originally before the flood, the path that God had intended for us originally when He told Abraham that He'd make him the father of a great nation. Right? We've been so distracted by the veil, by the everyday things that kind of occupy us in life, that we forgot that we are divine in nature, that our true purpose is in the garden, that we're meant to have a life of complete wholeness. So how do we transcend this human condition? Well, within Islam, we are asked to refocus that. We are asked to remember. Remember who we are in relation to God. Remember what God had asked us to do. And God, remember our initial place in the universe. Our initial place being the caretakers of the garden, being members of this perfect state within the garden. So we do this by submitting our will to Allah. Remember, this is in contrast to submitting our will to all the other stuff we submit our will to, right? All the things that pull our attention that we think are so important on a daily basis. Even more important is maybe to submit our will to Allah, remembering that, hey, we have life. We were given life. We should be grateful for this. What do you think the key idea, what do you take away from our discussion of Islam? Maybe it's that there's more to life than we often perceive. There's more to life than what we often experience. The things that we think are so important, that give us stress on a daily basis, maybe they're really trivial. Maybe they're not so important. Maybe there's something more important. Maybe there's something more important that's actually unifying, as opposed to following our own personal desires, which isn't very unifying. It's personal. It draws us away from other people. Maybe what we need to remember is that we're all children of God, and that would unify us. Maybe a key idea is how significant it is for a community to give ourselves to this greater purpose. That to give ourselves to Allah isn't simply about obeying a master, isn't simply about giving ourselves to an authority figure. Yeah, submitting to Allah is about strengthening the community. Giving ourselves to Allah is about changing our priorities in a way where we recognize that we are all one. We are all the family of God. We're all part of the family of the Creator who gave us life. Maybe now you see some various similarities amongst other religions to what we've learned about with Islam. Maybe there's some things that you weren't familiar with Islam that have dramatically changed your perspective on the faith, or maybe not. But with all faiths, what I'd like you to do with Islam is to try to get a sense for the mythos. How might the world be different? How might you experience reality differently if this narrative that I've just given you was how you perceive the world? That God is all around us, that we need to remember our relation to the divine, we need to remember our relation to creation. Even if you don't believe in God, if you don't believe that there was a person per se, you can just think of it in terms of, we were created. It wasn't as if we created ourselves. We were made somehow. We were put on the earth somehow. And what we're being asked to do in Islam is to appreciate that, to appreciate the fact that you are alive here, to appreciate the fact that there are things more important. There are things greater than ourselves and our daily desires, and that the thing that is greater than ourselves, believing in that, appreciating it, unifies us. Right? Okay, just one way of thinking about the mythos of the religion. Hopefully you can try to digest this and experience your own.